Thank you for listening to Reddit Rainbow. This is Kevin. On today's episode, we have part 2 of HOA wants me to join, so I do. Just not how they expected. We're going to start off today with the revenge. Exactly 30 days to the hour after the HOA had given me the 30 days notice, I knocked on the neighbor OO's door. Did I mention he was president of the HOA and had him sign for 2 documents? The first was that I planned to build a house on my HOA property, which confused him, and the second was notice that they had 30 days to remove from the property the guard shed, the parts of the electric boom that were on my property, as well as the sign. He tried to engage me, but I ignored him, climbed in my car, and drove off. Early the next morning, I got a call from the HOA lawyer who explained to me that their junk would be staying on my property, since it was in an unused part of my land. I explained that I was building a house there, and that the land would not be unused anymore. I could hear the smirk as he told me that building a second house to be spiteful would not be accepted by the courts. I sure hope he could hear the smirk in my voice when I told him that the property in question did not have a house, and was in fact barely large enough for a house to be built, and would not be large enough for any extraneous buildings. I then told him to go look up the property in question and call me back. I had sliced off just enough to be legal, which was just enough to build a small house. It took them just under 5 days to get back to me. Their lawyer told me that the terms of the easement meant that I could not cancel without their permission, so I emailed him a photo of the document they sent me canceling the easement. That afternoon, neighbor OO invited me to lunch, his treat, to discuss the problem. I said no thanks. He extended the offer again 2 days later, and again I said no thanks. Others of the original OO contacted me to try to talk. Some sounded aggressive, some sounded sympathetic. I said no thanks to each of them. Eventually the lawyer phoned and asked if we could come to some sort of arrangement. I asked what he had in mind, and he told me that he was prepared to discuss exclusion in exchange for access to my property. So I said no thanks, and please don't call again. About 9 days before their 30 days was up, I got a call from a different lawyer. He said he wanted to negotiate a surrender. His words, not mine. I agreed to meet him at his office the next day. I'd already had documents drawn up, and the meeting was as simple as me giving him the documents and him reading them over. My new easement offer included everything offered by the old easement offer. I changed the line "mow the lawn" to get the property to HOA standards and keep it there, since it was now in the HOA. Would cost them about $500 per month instead of $35. This amount would be increased with inflation. The previous contract didn't include that bit. When canceled for whatever reason, the HOA would have to pay me a cancellation fee of around $7,500. The contract would automatically terminate 30 days after any disciplinary action was taken against me, my tenant, or the property. Any complaints were levied by the HOA against the property. Any legal action was taken against the property by anyone in the HOA. The lawyer who had offered to negotiate surrender would be allowed to mediate any disputes between us at HOA's expense, and that the HOA would pay all my legal fees if any legal action was taken against me. I deliberately left some insane things in there so that I could appear to concede some points, or be negotiated down when the HOA got indignant about the points I actually cared about. The lawyer did not look happy. He said that my proposal sounded unfair, but that he'd have the HOA president look at them. I reminded him that in 8 days I'd be sending a group of men armed with sledgehammers and anger management issues loose on whatever of theirs was still on my property. That evening I got an irate call from the HOA president. He told me he was never going to sign the new contract. I said, okay. He then told me that I was charging too much per month and that it should be at the same rate as the previous contract. I pointed out that when I signed the previous contract, the area was under development, and there was at least one other road leading in and out, but now there was only mine, and besides, mine was now developed with everything they needed. He told me that I was forcing them to sign a document they didn't want to sign. I told him that he was free to not sign it. He whined about everything he could think of, and then eventually told me I'd be hearing from his lawyer. The next morning, surrendering lawyer called me to ask if I'd be willing to come to their offices to sign the contract. I agreed. When I got there that afternoon, I learned that surrender lawyer was not a lawyer, but a paralegal. He handed me the contract and asked me to sign it. He laughed when I told him I'd have to read through it first to make sure nothing was changed, and mumbled something that sounded like, "I'm sure you would." I read the contract. Nothing had been changed, not a single thing, and the HOA president had signed it, with the surrender paralegal signing as witness. I looked at him and said, "Why did he sign this? It was stupid to sign it." And the paralegal looked at me and said, "I started to tell him that signing it would be a bad decision, but he told me he wasn't being paid to give or think legal advice, and to shut up. So I shut up." I said, "Do you understand what he's signed here?" He looks at me and nods. He said, "I asked him if I should have one of the lawyers look at it before giving it to you, and he told me that they were already billed enough for this and that he'd sign it and sue me after their easement was safe." This happened about a year and a half ago. It took 6 months for the HOA to find out how screwed they were. They wanted to sue me, but their lawyers explained to them that there was no way to win. Even if the court sided with them, all they would get is the easement contract voided, and they did not think that the court would side with them. The lawyers were adamant about one thing: the HOA could not live with the "HOA pays my legal fees if legal action was taken against me," since it didn't limit the people taking legal action against me to the HOA. As worded, the HOA would be forced to pay for my legal fees if anyone took legal action against me. They argued that the courts would probably not enforce that, since the context of the agreement was to do with the HOA. And I told them I was prepared to find out, since the HOA would definitely be the ones taking action against me if they challenged it. I eventually signed an addendum to the contract that said that the neighbor OO, HOA president, would personally pay all my legal fees unless he held no position at all in the HOA, and that the HOA would pay all legal fees if the HOA took legal action against me. He resigned from the HOA at the end of that meeting. I politely told him in front of everyone that he should not sign documents unless he understands what he's signing. He didn't look pleased. It came out during the mediation. You cannot imagine how happy the lawyers were that their paralegal was mediating, that without the ability to control access to the HOA neighborhood through the security boom, partially on my property, the HOA had become a gated community a number of years back. The HOA would be in breach of their own articles and would be dissolved. I also learned, should have been obvious to me, that all the security cameras were wired and all terminated in the gatehouse guard shed. So basically it was my way or the end of the HOA. The first mediation was really quite funny. My paralegal looked more than a little glum as we assembled and he called everyone to order. I suspected that he had been told to work against me, so I took the initiative. I reminded everyone there that I had agreed to let paralegal mediate, but that I had agreed to no arbitration at all. If I didn't feel like the proceedings were fair, I'd leave and they could go ahead and sue. Paralegal brightened up and things actually went quite well. I'm writing this after getting home from the last mediation. I built a paddling pool for the neighborhood dogs. As I made it myself, I dug a hole, packed it with stone, and added a concrete finish. It was my first attempt, and if I say so myself, it looked, well, terrible. The HOA called for a mediation meeting. What they do now, instead of taking official action, I've declined their mediation requests in the past, in which they told me as nicely as they could that the paddling pool was an eyesore right at the entrance of the HOA. I asked them to create a list of what needed to be fixed and how it needed to be fixed to give me at the next meeting. The list was extensive. It basically required the pool to be rebuilt from scratch. I asked them if there was any way to reduce costs on the work they needed to get it up to HOA standards, and they assured me there was not. I thanked them, pulled out a copy of the agreement where they had agreed to get the property to HOA standards, which I'd highlighted, and handed it to them with the list. I told them that the HOA usually preferred if these things were dealt with in 30 days. They started arguing until the mediator reminded them that they could not force me to comply without causing the easement to end. I should mention that their lawyers usually no longer attended these things. They said they would get it done. I also learned a lot about neighbor OO today. I found out that neighbor OO sold his property about 3 months back and is apparently leaving the country for Australia. I found out that the HOA had successfully sued him for a sea load of money they had lost to his mismanagement as part of his vendetta against me. I also learned that he had a vendetta against me. I have no idea what I did to upset him. I'm not sure if I will screw with the HOA anymore. I already think I'm so close to breaking them, the only thing stopping them from canceling the contract is the massive financial loss if they do. I guess a lot depends on how they treat me and my tenants going forward. Also, I do like the monthly payments though, so I'm motivated to play nice. Neighbor OO was right, though in the end you really shouldn't sign documents unless you understand what you are reading. Too long didn't read. HOA president gets me to join the HOA under false pretenses that get upheld in court, then finds out that he signed up literally the wrong property and has to resign after getting the HOA in an incredibly expensive situation that it cannot get rid of.